They said the world had finished with Lillian Mercer. The divorce papers were crisp as winter air. The apartment smelled of boxed-up life and cheap coffee. People who once called her darling erased her as casually as one sweeps crumbs from a table. None of them expected the small woman in the moth-eaten coat to walk out of a ribbon-cutting party with a set of keys and a black card that made the room go still. The rain begins like an apology and turns into an insistence. Lillian stands under the doorway of a laundromat, sleeves rolled, hair pinned back in a knot that has become habitual for mornings that never promise anything. Grandma Fiona, whose fingers smell of lemon oil and who looks as if she has always been ready to solve a problem with grit and knitting needles, hands her a parcel wrapped in newsprint. Inside, 2 sandwiches, a peeled apple, and a note in Evan's handwriting reminding her, again, that she should manage on her own. Evan's voice is a memory that won't quiet. In the cramped kitchen of their now divided apartment, he had said so many things that passed for cruelty, a list of reasons why she had been a convenience, a sad little voice telling her she'd made choices and now must face them. When the divorce finalizes, he leaves the better china and takes fewer apologies. He keeps the curated life. His new partner's shoes line up like offer letters at the closet door, and Lillian keeps the stack of unpaid bills and a mug with a hairline crack. She moves like a woman who has learned to make small economies out of worn-out things. She returns library books with the patience of someone who knows time will pass, and she pays for the bus with exact change because she learned the humiliating mathematics of surviving. Yet she refuses, with a stubborn tenderness, to let her being be defined by what others think. When a neighbor's dog misbehaves on her step, she apologizes to the dog. Grandma Fiona watches her, chest tight, eyes mapping every bruise like a cartographer. Fiona once held a position, long ago, in a house with draperies and winter servants. She doesn't speak of it much, but she has taught Lillian certain things: how to fold a napkin into something that looks like artistry, how to tell the truth without shattering people, how to be small and still keep inside a backbone. On the day Lillian stumbles into the Sullivan Group's gleaming sales pavilion, she has no expectations at all. She's been sent there by a well-meaning acquaintance who told her they needed a cleaner for the afternoon, an honest day's pay. The Sullivan showroom is cold and deliberate, all polished marble and curated brass that looks as if sunlight was a suggestion, not a necessity. Salespeople in tailored smiles smile the smile of a practiced future. Banners proclaim a new development, grand garden villas, each framed by glossy photos of a life that smells faintly of fig trees and imported honey.
It is a promotional opening, a place of orchestral applause and champagne corks. A ribbon is cut. The crowd leans forward. Mr. Chambers, the smooth-faced events manager, taps a drum of raffle tickets with one polished finger and announces the prize like a benediction. Grand Garden Villa 1, fully furnished, plus our exclusive associate card, issued at the chairman's discretion. Lillian, broom in hand, takes the sweepings to the bin and pauses because a scrap of paper flutters toward her like a small white bird. It is a ticket, no name, a serial not meant for hands like hers. For a moment she stares, because she has twice in her life found money on the street and always left it there. Money is an awkward guest. But this is not money. This is luck with a hole in it where doubt might slip through. She folds the ticket and tucks it into her pocket, because she cannot pretend her hands are not greedy, even for small miracles. When Chambers draws, his hand is like an instrument, precise, practiced. He pulls the ticket and reads the number aloud. The crowd leans forward. The camera catches faces, all constructed expectations. He looks to the stage attendant for a name. The attendant consults a list. No match. Confusion threads the applause. The ticket does not belong. For a strange comic moment, the entire room looks like a troupe that has forgotten its final bow. Somewhere along the line, Mr. Chambers' eyes find the cleaner in the corner. He blinks, not because Lillian is remarkable, she is not made for remark, but because the serial on the ticket matches the one folded now into her palm. The world plays a small trick. He calls her name. "Miss, are you—" And the spotlight shifts. Lillian feels the sound of it rushing like water into her ears. She walks on stage like a woman who has not rehearsed triumph. The applause feels like wind against thin glass. Mr. Chambers hands her a heavy envelope. Inside, a set of ornate keys lie in a velvet bed, and under that, a black card that is too black, like a piece of lacquered night, and impossibly thin. The card's face is stamped with the Sullivan crest and false modesty. Sullivan privilege card, access level, supreme. A small clerk ceremoniously explains that the card accompanies the villa and grants privileges. Lillian laughs, the sound brittle and unanchored. There is a photograph taken. There is a headline later that reads something primly indignant, random winner or inside joke. But for the moment, the applause makes Lillian dizzy and everything else is distant. She thinks of how many times she has been left out of a gesture like this. Parties that closed their doors, theater nights that left no room beyond the velvet ropes. Now the ropes appear in reverse, and she is dizzy with the novelty of being inside. Grandma Fiona claps like someone who is fighting gravity. She slaps Lillian's back and shouts in a voice that has commanded kitchens and never lost the ability to terrify relatives. "You go on, girl."
They can't know what to do with you now. Her grin is private and wide. Lillian's hands, those used to dishwater, close around the keys as if that small weight will anchor her. If you love jaw-dropping transformations, hit subscribe and stay for the rest of the journey. The weeks after the win blur like a film reel shot on 2 different speeds. There is a formal letter, there is a notarized certificate. Sullivan Group arranges a small handover ceremony with hors d'oeuvres that make her sudden lack of experience visible. A local paper arranges for photos. The black card is photographed jewelry style on a silk cloth. Her life is suddenly a sequence of exposures, keys, smiles, and awkward toast. The villa is not a cottage, it is a house of measured extravagance, tall windows that gulp in light, and a garden with trees sculpted like velvet. The interior smells faintly of lemon oil and the kind of cleaning agents densely sold to the rich. Lillian almost weeps when the gardener shows her where the herbs are planted, basil that will complicate her kitchen life. Society is a mirror that sometimes laughs cruelly. The same faces that did not notice her at markets now turn to study the oddity of her presence. Nina Valmont, in a dress that looks designed to hold the light at a distance, curates an expression of surprise that reads as condemnation. "What an interesting choice," Nina says in a voice made of polished glass when they meet at a preview event. Around her, others tuck their knives of impression into polite palms. Lillian recognizes, with a small shame, how untrained she is in the rituals that sanction belonging. The right fork, the right pause and laughter, the correct way to nod as if you were competent in acquired wealth. The black card is both a pass and a provocation. It opens doors, but also pinpoints her as an anomaly. In a city that measures worth by the company on one's credit statement, the supreme card is a symbol that smells faintly of scandal. Someone will always want to know the origin. Parliament of Whispers forms like a small storm. At the Ritz-like preview, someone snaps a photograph of Lillian in a doorway and posts it under a headline that asks if she is a plant or a miracle. At the generosity banquet, intended to show Sullivan charm, she arrives escorted by Mr. Chambers, and the room tilts towards celebrity. It is a space that smells of orchids and the faint metallic tang that rises when a room is full of many small, expensive things. The chandeliers are like upside-down galaxies. The menu lists things she would never order, and names them as if pronouncing them were paying taxes to another life. She sits awkwardly, her knees conscious, as if she had been placed on a stage with an audience of knives. Nina makes the air thin. She drops an anecdote so well-crafted that everyone tilts to drink it in.
Lillian watches with a practiced smallness, and yet she is not invisible. Cameras gather color around her like gulls circling something bright. The card sits in her purse, warm against her thigh, a small reactor of possibility. When the dessert tray arrives, a waiter trips, an accident that everyone will later comment on as poor timing, and a spill runs like a river toward Lillian's lap. Someone gasps like an instrument being plucked too hard. The waiter mutters apologies, but the optics are arranged. A photograph appears on a social feed within minutes, captioned with a mocking emoji. A snide comment circulates, but more dangerous than mockery is suspicion. A woman in a fox fur leans over and says, with the soft cruelty of habitual predators, "Do you know how these things are usually arranged? Don't embarrass us." Lillian's mouth tastes of lemon and remorse. She laughs politely, but inside a small part of her goes rigid and starts to count the ways she does not belong. A guard at the door, who has been briefed to expect any number of oddities, asks for the card. The reader blinks at first. Technology is flirtatious, and then refuses to accept the plastic that others are sure is counterfeit. Lillian slides the card again. The machine makes a sound like a confused animal. Nina watches, triumphant in her assumption. A video begins, capturing the moment in tight grain. A social account with 1,000 followers posts the clip, and a caption that will gather teeth and curiosity. How did she get in? Accusations in public are a species of violence because they mark you before you can speak. Someone whispers forgery, and the room's air tightens.
Mr. Chambers, flushed with embarrassment, attempts to explain that the card accompanies the villa, but words spin out in the face of spectacle. Lillian feels a warmth rise to her face, a guilty warmth, not because she has anything to hide, but because this is how life has always struck her. When she takes one step toward being seen, others rush to assert that she is not allowed to be. Grandma Fiona is not a woman given to public displays, but she understands that redress sometimes requires sound and fury. She steps forward, voice like a well-used hammer. "That card is hers," she says, to the room and to the feed. "It was handed to her. Deal with it like you would any other significant, inconvenient truth." Her bluntness has a way of clearing fog. The crowd mutters, and the cameras swivel. The card works once, then again. Somewhere a piece of the systems fails, then backs up, then accepts. The security manager, a man who has known nothing but procedure, makes notes and offers tea, as if tea could reorder the world. But the damage done to perception, the idea that the card might not be what it appears, cannot be undone with a thermos. Lillian tries to explain her presence, that she was hired for cleaning, that she found a ticket, that she did not know what to expect.
Her voice wobbles in small ways that betray the work of someone unused to being the center of rumor. A recording runs out on social platforms, and with every play, the version of her becomes lighter and more fabulous to people who presume she is an affectation. That night, the city is cruel. The headlines are not yet savage, but the comments gather like small, spiteful birds. Someone with more time than decency writes that she is a poser, and another calls her a plant. There are whispers, always whispers, not for the content, but for the pleasure of gossip. Lillian sits in the villa's kitchen, the house a foreign body around her, and touches the black card as if it might dissolve. The keys hang on a nail like small, inscrutable stars. She calls Evan, because the habit of reaching for refuge in familiar weather is a dangerous but reliable thing. His voicemail plays its usual uncaring tune. He does not pick up. The following days introduce Lillian to the machinery that transforms a private event into private property and then into public rumor. A PR manager calls to schedule interviews. A stylist arrives like an exotic bird, and Lillian lets them fold her into another version of herself the way one folds linens to be stored, gentle but not intimate. There are fittings where clothes feel like armor. There are dinners where everyone speaks like they have attended a seminar in self-possession. In another life, Lillian had believed wealth would change only how she paid for things. She discovers it rewrites how people estimate you. Her credit suddenly has attracted other hungry things, the curiosity of relatives who had been absent for years and social columnists who smell a scandal. She learns to expect knives masquerading as compliments. When a passive-aggressive rumor circulates that she must have connections, Lillian laughs one afternoon with Harry Foster. Harry, a man whose name carries company in consequence, meets her in a garden built to be admired. He is not an aristocrat in the old sense. He is a CEO whose youth surprised many and whose senses have been trained on systems. He sees things in balancing sheets and human gestures both. He watches her with a tenderness that is not theatrical. He defends her in small, practical ways, a retweet clarifying a timeline, a call to the PR team suggesting restraint. His people fail to understand why he does this, and that fails to surprise him. He believes in protecting people who have been publicly unmannered. "You don't have to be anyone's spectacle," he says, hands in his pockets, and the garden smells like newly cut grass and a shadow of citrus. The line is not romantic in a sweeping way. It is precise, a map of boundaries. Harry is careful in that way, and his care is both a comfort and another thing Lillian must learn to weigh, the difference between being defended and being owned. But public suspicion is a patient animal. A minor headline becomes a larger article. A gossip column uncoils someone's past like rope. The Sullivan Board, sensitive to the scent of scandal, convenes in a room with glass walls. Members speak in measured cadences about perception, brand, and liability. Someone suggests a discreet inquiry into the card's issuance. Someone else recalls that promotions are promotions, and promotions go wrong when the public smells impropriety. Lillian tries to reply with the simplest, truest things, that the ticket was found, that she had not planned for fame, that she is grateful. It rarely helps. People are invested in narratives that are convenient, the kind that allow them to compile her into a lesson. The thing about being newly wealthy in a world that measures you by pedigree is that the hand of friendship often appears as a glove with a dagger. A board member's daughter, Nina's friend, posts a picture of Lillian at a cocktail table, and the caption is a single small poison. Comments multiply. Someone, somewhere, calls for a more thorough audit.
Mr. Sinclair, the marketing manager, lines up his words about risk and brand stewardship, and his face suggests he has practiced looking concerned for a lifetime. A week after the banquet, at a private preview meant to show Lillian's villa to potential buyers as a masterstroke of promotional theater, a problem emerges that will come to define the next few weeks. The black card refuses to authorize a simple transfer. A vendor arrives to discuss furniture, and the contract that was supposed to seal their custom work shows a hole too big to be shrugged off, a pricing error that the vendor claims was authorized by a card swipe. The decimal point is off. The zeros are missing. A $10,000 order reads like a $10 million commitment. Contracts like these are not merely documents, they are fast-moving trains when you put signatures to them. There is a moment when the vendor's eyes, small and professional, find Lillian with a mixture of accusation and embarrassment. He is not cruel, he is livelihood-focused and terrified. "Who authorized this?" he asks. Lillian opens her mouth, and for once the words are not steady enough to be useful. She did not authorize anything. The black card is small and forbidding in her wallet, and yet here it is implicated in an expense that reads like a headline. Richard, a quiet man who knows corridors and relies on discretion the way others rely on air, pulls her aside. He speaks in the low voice of someone who has been inside and seen the machinery. "You were given that card," he says. "We'll review the logs. But you must understand, people will look for a human face to blame before they look at the machines that did it. There is an efficiency to blame. It is the city's favorite way of staying clean." Lillian, who has always known the particular sting of assumption, feels the world tilt toward spectacle once more.
She spends a night awake on the villa's narrow bed, listening to the wind and to the creak of imported doors. She thinks of the papers she had to sign at the handover, an avalanche of legalese, with a blank acceptance that admitted she did not know much about contracts or company policy. She had signed, as we all tend to sign, with the belief that a smiling clerk would not hand her a noose. As the PR machine warms up to the crisis, a frantic call comes through from Mr. Chambers. An internal memo leaked. A social feed reposted it. "Accusation of fraud," reads an indignant headline that loops like a cartoon. People have always liked villains who are easy to sketch with a single line. Lillian is no villain, and yet she sees in the mirror a face that the public wants to edit. She meets Harry in the villa's small breakfast room, just a table and two mismatched chairs, and tells him, in simple, halting words, everything she knows. The ticket she found, the keys, the card, the contract she did not sign. Harry listens, eyes narrowing, not with suspicion but concentration. He says, haltingly, "We'll sort it. We'll make them see the ledger. There are logs, audit trails. Whoever did this will be found." He says it with the authority of a man used to finding accountability in systems. But Lillian knows systems can be slow when the public wants spectacle. She also knows that being defended publicly makes her an easier target in some ways. The press loves a defended person just as much as it adores a spectacle, because the contrast sharpens. On the morning the vendor's complaint goes public, Evan appears at the villa's gate like something she has been trying to forget. He carries a briefcase, as if responsibility is a weight he expects someone else to hold. His voice is oily with regret and ego. "Lillian," he says, stepping close enough to be in her space, but not close enough to mean the apology. "I hear things are going well for you." There is the old habitual reflex, wanting to seek shelter and familiarity, and then there is the newer reflex, the one that has been built under the pressure of being publicly seen, to be courteous but to keep your ground. Lillian chooses the latter. "Things are complicated," she answers. She will not let pity be another person's amusement. Evan's smile is quick and taunting, and he makes a move to be magnanimous. "Look, if you want to negotiate something, if an arrangement would make this smoother," he begins. Lillian's face arranges itself into a line that says no. She has learned in small increments to say the word. Fiona watches from the kitchen window like a hawk that knows target and terrain. The relationship with Evan has taught Lillian tenderness toward herself in an unlikely way. She recognizes that the kitty of her life might have furnishings now, but she will not be offered a corner of comfort in exchange for surrender. Outside, the city keeps its gossip alive.
The contract scandal grows teeth as board members fear reputational damage. Boardroom whispers turn into a demand for an internal audit. The PR team spins statements. Lawyers are touched with the light hand of someone who makes threats sound like courtesy. Lillian receives a letter that is both polite and cold. The company will investigate, and in the meantime, access privileges might be suspended. The black card suddenly feels heavier in her wallet. There are small kindnesses, too. Grandma Fiona refuses to let Lillian sleep through the day. She makes tea and moves like someone who understands that ritual can be the anchor that keeps you from being swept away by rumor. Harry sends a message that is precise, practical, and warm. He will attend the audit meeting as a private observer. Richard, who has been watching the corridors for years, offers to help her understand the logs. But suspicion hovers like a damp cloud. A photograph surfaces of Lillian leaving the showroom on the day of the drawing, and the angle has been manipulated to suggest opportunism. Someone calls for the Sullivan Group to release all records of the ticket draw. The board balks. The chairman, a man whose face is slow and measured, speaks of due process and reputation. We must be careful, he advises. We cannot rush to judgments, but we must also not allow chaos. Lillian feels the weight of being an object in a room full of people making policy about a life that is suddenly public. She learns quickly that belonging, when one has not earned it in the way noble society expects, is less a gift than a trial. Wealth, she discovers, is not simply an account balance. It is also a story other people tell about you. And yet, amid the noise, there are moments of raw, small grace. A neighbor brings a plant to her front door, a green thing that says, without words, "You may stay." A young intern in the marketing department offers her a hand in the cafeteria and does not look away. These gestures are invisible to the cameras, but they matter in a way that tidy headlines never will. When she stands later, in the privacy of the villa's simple study, Lillian places the black card on a stack of mail and looks at it as if it were a foreign creature. The house groans like a large animal. Outside, the city is a hum. She realizes that the only thing she can control in any immediate sense is her reaction, how she answers a call, how she treats a waiter, how she holds her chin when cameras wait. Night comes and she finds herself awake, fingers on the keys. She hears the television down the hall, an economic analyst discussing the peril of unguided generosity. Lillian laughs, a small sound that is not entirely joy. The villa is a new shape around her, a body that fits but does not define. She knows she must learn how to build a life in it, one that is not merely a set of photographs and rumor. A knock at the door interrupts her reverie. It is, improbably, Mrs.
Sullivan, dressed plain and carrying a small tin of tea. The chairwoman's presence is not announced by fanfare, but by a casual domesticity that makes the villa seem, suddenly, less like a stage. "Tea?" Mrs. Sullivan asks, as if the script of their relationship were being rewritten in private. There is an ease to the offer that confounds expectations. The chairwoman's eyes crinkle. She has seen the headlines in the whispering rooms. "People love a story," she says frankly, and then they forget to check their facts. Lillian finds that Mrs. Sullivan's attention is not merely politeness. There is a sharpness there, a memory like bone. The woman asks one plain question. "Do you want to know what this is?" She taps the black card with a finger that knows its own authority. For the first time since the ticket floated into her life, Lillian feels she might be given more than a prize. She might be offered an explanation. Before the chairwoman can elaborate further, a commotion erupts in the front hall. A reporter, uninvited and insistent, demands entry. A socialite nearby has shouted that the card was arranged, and the accusation ricochets outward with the velocity of a thrown rock. The kitchen door bangs, someone shoves too hard, a voice high and cruel calls Lillian a con artist in a tone meant to wound. Grandma Fiona steps into the hallway like a ship cutting a wake. She meets the reporter's glare with the precise arithmetic of a woman who has loved too long to be impressed with the spectacle. "You want the truth?" she says. "Start with your own keyboards." It is a small explosion. The reporter's recorder clicks hungrily. Cameras rush forward. Mrs. Sullivan shuts the door with a soft authoritarian hand that suggests there are more powerful stories to tell than the ones being screamed at the threshold. But the damage is already in motion. The clip of the accusation leaps across feeds and into the hungry mouths of talk shows. Lillian, heart hammered into a rhythm of fear and outrage, feels the walls of the villa shrink. Papers rustle. The black card sits on the table like a secret that can be opened by anyone with the appetite to look. She tries to hold on to the moment when she held the keys, the moment when the world, if briefly, smiled at her possibility. She knows that having wealth will not soften every indignity. She knows intuitively that money is not an umbrella against human cruelty. But she also knows that something fundamental has shifted. She will not slide back into the cracks as she once did. The key sits in her fingers like an instrument of choice.
Outside the villa, on a stoop that seems suddenly too public, a woman records the scene on her phone and laughs in a way that is both triumph and dismissal. The footage leaps forward, threaded with commentary that will not be kind. Lillian hears it, like distant thunder, and realizes that this is her new weather to master. She breathes. She will not be reduced to a rumor.
She will not be a punchline. She will, with whatever stubbornness she can muster, find a means to be heard. There is no simple answer, but there is a first step. To learn the ledger, to understand how a missing zero can look like malevolence, to find the hands that might have slipped. There are, she senses, people who want to help, but who will be cautious because any association might stain their reputations. There are also those who will move to use her as a lesson to preserve the status quo. That night, in the dim light of the villa, Lillian places the black card under a book and lays her head back. She thinks of all the time she has had to pretend the world didn't notice her absence. She thinks of Grandma Fiona's steadfastness and Harry's small, accurate kindness. She thinks of the way the chairwoman's hand rested on the card, as if offering a question. When sleep finally comes, it is brittle, but it is sleep. In the morning, Lillian wakes to a world that feels a little larger and a little more dangerous. The card's mystery sits between them like a challenge. She knows the coming weeks will be about more than weathering headlines. They will be about claiming a dignity that does not depend solely on other people's appraisal. The first real gust of the storm breaks when an anonymous photograph circulates that suggests the card was found in an unexpected place the day the ticket was drawn. A detail that would, if true, imply manipulation. Mr. Chambers calls frantic emails. Mr. Sinclair drafts statements. The chairman signs off on a review. In the corridors of power, men and women move with the economy of people who have a reputation to preserve. Panels are convened. Questions are asked. Lillian, who has only ever asked for small mercies, now finds herself at the center of a corporate inquest that could either clear her or unmake her. She walks into the first formal meeting not quite sure what she prefers, the warm cloak of being cleared, or the radical possibility of being believed because of who she is, not because she was lucky. She presses her palms on the table and refuses, underneath the polite words and measured sentences, to be dismissed. There will be more to this, more accusations, more rescuers, more revelations. But this is the moment the world first took Lillian seriously. It is the hinge on which the next months will swing. She breathes, steadying herself, and for the first time in a long while, decides that whatever happens, she will be an active agent in the story being written about her. The audit that should have been a quiet internal thing becomes a public drumroll because the world prefers conclusions in capital letters. It begins properly with an email, subject, internal review, unauthorized authorization. Lillian reads it at the kitchen table, the villa's sunlight cutting the steam from her tea into sharp gold. The words feel formal, like a polite rope.
The card, for the moment, is still under the book where she left it. She resists the urge to let it vanish into her pocket and become easier to forget. Gavin Sinclair meets her the next morning beneath the glass atrium of Sullivan Group like a man who has chosen the right angle for every entrance. He is not grand, but he has a practiced steadiness, an analytical clarity that sometimes reads as kindness. He offers her a role before the meeting is over, assistant in the marketing wing, temporarily, for the duration of the review, he says. And then he adds, softer, because you should know what they look at. The words are a small decency. It will be, Gavin explains, a chance for Lillian to see how the company thinks, to sit inside the machinery that is accusing her. Walking into the building feels different from walking into the villa. The atrium hums with climate control precision. People move in predictable corridors like fish in a designed stream. They are the sort of people who wear decisions like coats. Lillian's own coat, still moth-eaten at the cuff, though now cleaner, carries an oddness in this place, a quiet persistence. Her first day is a collage of micro-embarrassments, introductions where names are mumbled, a printer jam that she awkwardly resolves and is congratulated for with a laugh that has sympathetic spikes, a company ID card that sticks to her palm like an immigrant. Some look at her as if she is a minor hazard, others simply wonder where she fits in a page of roles. Nina navigates the marketing department like she owns the floor, offering Lillian a thin smile that is all teeth and nothing generous. Gavin's office is on the third floor, windows a thin blue between the world and the sky. His desk bears no family photos, his humility is professional. He explains with patient diagrams and his finger on the screen what the log entries mean, timestamps, IP addresses, card authorizations. He shows her how 1,000 small digital confirmations become a narrative that can be read like a ledger or weaponized like a headline. People will always assume a single cause, he says. They like villains because villains save them the work of thinking. He taps the screen and brings up the transaction that started the scandal, a furniture vendor's invoice that supposedly migrated from 10,000 to 10 million in the space between a swipe and a signature. The authorization trail shows that the approval token matched Lillian's card ID, but the originating terminal was not the villa. It came from inside the company, from a sales terminal in the promotions pavilion. It can look bad, Gavin says, but looks are often an argument, not evidence. Richard, when he meets them, is a map of corridors who smells faintly of ink. He is taken to Lillian like someone who recognizes the outline of a familiar map on a long-lost page. Together, they comb through timestamps and CCTV.
They find a glitch in the feed, a 2-minute gap during which the promotions terminal's log was overwritten. The overwrite is crude. Someone replaced the file with a duplicate that bears an edit mark. It reads like a hurried person trying to tidy a mess. "You see this?" Richard says. "It's not elegant. Whoever tried to make you the face of this must have been rushed." "But why?" Lillian asks. "Because it is the question that hugs the edges of every fear she has. Why make her the face of a mess? Who would want that?" Gavin shrugs, which in him means power plays are sometimes less about money than about position. A board member's panic, and panic creates scapegoats. If someone wants the brand quiet, an easy scandal is better than a bad policy. They cannot prove anything yet. For a week, the company behaves the way institutions do when a scandal threatens. Statements are drafted and redrafted. Executives learn the diction of contrition and the art of delay. Nina posts a piece that is half innocuous, half poison. A photo of Lillian stepping out of a black car with a caption that implies rehearsal and intent. Comments swell. The PR firm floats calming phrases like life rafts and then anchors them in neutral language. Meanwhile, Lillian learns the department's rhythms. Morning stand-ups where buzzwords are served like toast. Brainstorms that feel like games where the prize is attention. Coffee machines that dispense status via foam art. She learns to read a calendar like a new language. In the small hours, after a day of figureheads and platitudes, she sits in a conference room and reads old press packets, the stories Sullivan told the city when it wanted to be loved. There is comfort in seeing how narratives are constructed. If a story can be built, it can perhaps be undone. Harry remains a fixture in the margins of her days. Text messages of support, unshowy gestures that do not call attention to themselves. He attends to things behind the scenes. A private note to a journalist who has been fair. A call to a legal counsel friend with an alert about the vendor. He does not intervene like a knight. He intervenes like an engineer who knows which bolt might make a bridge wobble. It is a kindness Lillian has only just begun to register as love that respects agency. Evan, predictably, does not respect agency. The man who once treated her like a piece of household furniture now shows up at industry mixers with a limp apology and an opportunist smile. He is careful to keep just enough distance to claim he is a concerned bystander. In private, he calls, long, sweet-sounding voicemails that ask if she is coping and offer help with the sort of help that always expects a seat in her kitchen. Lillian does not let him in. She refuses his small briberies of attention, and in doing so marks a line he cannot walk back across. The scandal feeds the city's appetite. An investigative story, well-structured and ruthless, prints a version that reads like a parable, a displaced woman suddenly in possession of symbols she cannot explain, and a brand that misses the chance to stop her. It quotes anonymous sources within the company who suggest negligence and an unvetted privilege card that should have never seen daylight. The board calls for immediate answers. For the company, answers are found in meetings with glass walls and sharper tones. The chairman, quietly furious, demands a probe. The PR team holds a press conference to announce temporary suspension of card privileges pending investigation. They are careful to say pending, as if pending is a balm. The reporters are not mollified. Lillian is not fired. That would make for a cleaner scandal. Instead, she is officially folded into the investigation, assigned a liaison, given access to repository logs, and required to appear in recorded interviews. It is the bureaucratic equivalent of being made into a case study. She sits for one such interview in a sterile room under warm lighting, and the questions are clinical. What were your activities that day? Who did you speak to? Who did you trust? People watch the tape, and somewhere in the city, food writers and columnists decide whether she will be permitted to be forgiven. Meanwhile, the missing zero contract eats at the company's finances and reputation. A small vendor threatens to go public, and the board contemplates indictments. The vendor's owner, a practical man with a clean accent and hands that advertise trade, is not interested in vengeance. He is interested in solvency. He wants his invoices paid. On a Friday that threatens rain, he arrives in the Sullivan lobby and demands an explanation that will cost someone face. Night brings a different tension. Lillian, in the villa,
reads printed copies of the logs like an investigator, following digital footprints as if they might lead to a physical heartbeat. She finds, eventually, a line of code, an internal override that was executed by a user with access privileges higher than a clerk's. The override has a name attached. The end-of-line tag reads, Sul PR Admin. It is a tag that could be, in corporate language, anyone from a junior manager to someone in the chairman's office. The path is messy. Lillian cannot see a villain. She sees a web of bureaucracy that allows scapegoating. Her frustration is a small, sharp thing. She thinks of Evan's briefcase. She thinks of Nina's smile. She thinks of Mr. Chambers' nervous hand. She calls Richard and pushes the list of anomalies across the screen. We can trace the tag to a machine, Richard says, but that machine sits in the vault of promotions and events, and access to that terminal is, well, it's limited. We need a physical trail, not just the code. They set a trap, a quiet meetup at the promotions pavilion, pretending to move an inventory list.
Gavin supports the move, if only because inquiries must be answered with evidence. The night they decide to watch, the showroom is a cathedral of artificial lawn and carefully lit facsimiles of domesticity. It is both absurd and eerily intimate. Halfway through the night, someone arrives, a contractor with a delivery trolley, late, apologetic. The camera in the corner records the comings and goings. When Gavin fast-forwards the footage later, there is a moment that stings. Mr. Chambers, alone in the back, lurking near the terminal, fingers moving with a deliberate economy. He is not hasty, his actions are tidy. But then the footage shows another figure enter, a woman in a coat, who pauses, speaks to Mr. Chambers in an earnest hush, and then leaves with a small envelope. The face is quick to pass the frame, but it is enough. The camera captures the handbag's outline, the way she puts away the envelope. The woman's profile is familiar in a way that pins Lillian to an old anxiety. She recognizes, then does not, then realizes that the outline matches a face she had seen, Mrs. Sullivan's, but younger, maybe, in another life. The footage is blurred. It is, however, the seed of a lead, a private instruction maybe, a secret favor that could explain the ticket. Mr. Chambers' account is shaky when confronted. He claims he acted without full context, that a senior chairwoman's assistant asked him to include a surprise in the draw. It sounds absurd. It sounds like an excuse. He grows pale, and in his pallor there is the sheen of reach and fear. Gavin brings this to the chairman. The chairman sits like a man who has practiced restraint and suddenly reveals a bone hunger for truth. If someone interfered, he says, voice low, we need to know who and why, but we must also be careful about assumption. His hands are folded, a king in a small court. He calls for a family meeting disguised as a banquet, a reunion, he says, to mark the company's anniversary and to demonstrate transparency. The public invites arrive. The city's gossip mills grind with gleeful anticipation. The board hopes, roughly and wrongly, that a grand event will bury the file clips. For some, it is a chance at display. Lillian knows there is risk. She knows also that the chairman's summons feels like a theater that might hold a revelation. Mrs. Sullivan calls her privately and says, with a voice that is almost conspiratorial, "Come, whatever happens, you will be among family." The banquet is an exercise in controlled opulence, candelabras, white-gloved servers, a menu that reads like an annotated poem. Guests take their places at tables that suggest social coordinates. Nina sits close enough to needle. Evan, brisk, insincere, accepts an invitation and arranges himself as though apology and presence are interchangeable. The chairman rises at the appointed moment. His presence calms the room the way a conductor calms an orchestra, not by force but by expectedness.
He speaks about brand, about trust, about the responsibilities of stewardship. He then sets down the small speech and invites Mrs. Sullivan to take over, and the room leans forward because Mrs. Sullivan's moments are rarer and therefore more prized. She stands, plain in an almost comically human dress that refuses the night's elaborate costume, and she looks at Lillian in the way someone looks at a page that might contain a revelation. "There is a story," she begins, "that has been with this family longer than most of the building's pipelines. It is a story of mistakes, of children who left, and of people who have been searching." The room murmurs. The socialites widen their eyes like small flags. Lillian feels a lightness and a heaviness, expectation and dread braided. Mrs. Sullivan does not rush. She tells them quietly about a photograph in an old box, an image of a child with strong features and a faint gap in the smile, taken decades ago, the proof of a life once interrupted by absence. She tells them about letters that were misfiled by time, and an old woman named Fiona who, years before, had kept an address in her purse, just in case. The story unfolds like a carefully folded map. The revelation lands not as an accusation, but as a soft, devastating piece of truth. Lillian is the granddaughter they had been searching for, an error of record, an adoption misremembered, a life diverted by an old wrong. At the end of Mrs. Sullivan's small oration, the chairman produces an envelope and, with a slow hand, lays upon the table the ticket stub that matches the one Lillian found, its serial number written in a handwriting the chairman recognizes, the handwriting of his wife when she was younger and more impulsive. He explains then that the black card was meant as a private gesture, an attempt to reach out across a family misfortune without disturbing protocol. It had been intended in part as a private experiment, to see how an unexpected gift might be met. The room is a clock that stops. Then it ticks with new physics. Some faces flush with shame, others turn to calculations. What does lineage mean to inheritance, to brand, to public narrative? The microphones hum, the cameras catch every transfigure. Evan, who had come to smirk, feels his expression slide into something more exposed. Nina's smile dies like a candle. She searches for words and finds none. She looks small without the comfort of her coordinated contempt. "Are you saying this was all a stunt?" a columnist asks, sharp as a note. Mrs. Sullivan answers with a blunt gentleness that leaves little room for spectacle. It was a reckless, private attempt to undo a wrong, badly handled, but it is not a crime. It is, however, a family needing repair. Then comes proof that makes the public thread taut. A locket, an object Lillian has never seen, taken from a drawer in Mrs. Sullivan's handbag and opened.
Inside is a faded photograph, a woman with Lillian's chin, a little boy with a shock of hair. The locket contains a note in a trembling hand. "If ever a child of ours returns, forgive us for the silence." The room breathes. The cameras do not blink. The chairman's voice grows quiet, and then, in a move that surprises even some board members, he steps forward and speaks directly to Lillian in a manner that is at once formal and warm. "You did not ask for this. None of this absolves the hurt and the errors of the past. But you are family, and family owes you transparency, not rumor. We will correct the record." The word family now becomes a hinge. People who had been allies step forward. People who had been critics confront their conscience. Mr. Chambers, who had earlier claimed to be a pawn, is left visibly shaken. He stands and offers a halting apology to Lillian, an apology about fear and about following orders. It does not repair everything. It begins, awkwardly, like a piece of mending. But the banquet is not merely a social vindication. The legal department still needs resolution. The vendor must be reimbursed, the audit must be concluded. The board votes to reinstate Lillian's privileges and to fund a third-party review of internal overrides. It is not a clean victory. The company cannot erase the public's appetite for drama, but it is a movement toward redress. Evan tries, in the corner, to transform contrition into opportunity. He approaches Lillian after the chairman's speech, voice small and rehearsed. "Look, now that things—" He reaches a hand that is meant to be conciliatory and perhaps even charming. Lillian meets him with a look she has practiced since the villa's first night. Steady, implacable, uncompromising. "No," she says. "The word is not cruel but principled. You were absent when it mattered." It is the truth. Evan's face rearranges into a kind of salve-seeking expression, then into something like regret. He asks if there is room to negotiate. Money, perhaps, the small currency of his apology. She recognizes the pattern. His offers are always an attempt to buy her back into a place that hurts her. She refuses. Fiona stands close by and does not clap. Instead, she looks at Evan the way an old hawk looks at a squirrel that has overstayed its welcome. Harry, who has been at the fringes like a steady support, does not demand or claim. He offers his hand and does not lead her away. He stands beside her. Their faces together do not make a statement about marriage or rescue. They make a statement about choice. The aftershocks of the banquet ripple through the city. Columnists write new pieces about the heiress revealed, some sympathetic, some sly. Nina's social standing wanes in particular circles. She loses an invitation or two and finds that the people who had wanted her for novelty now prefer quieter company. Mr. Chambers is put on leave pending an investigation that suggests impropriety in handling the ticket.
The vendor is paid. The company announces a public apology and a fund in Lillian's name for community housing initiatives, an attempt at reparation and public good. Lillian has a decision to make as the headlines die down and the quiet that follows becomes palpable. The chairman, in private, invites her to consider a formal role in the family foundation.
He offers, with respectful language and a touch of corporate polish, the prospect of a life that would carry financial comfort and social protection. It is tempting: stability, access to resources, and opportunity to do good at scale. But the offer has strings that are not invisible: expectation, attendance at events, the possibility of losing authorship over how her life is portrayed. The chairman and Mrs. Sullivan imagine a place for her that is partly archival and partly charitable. They imagine roles that fit neat public narratives. Lillian's instinct, honed by years of small survival and recent public correction, pushes her towards something different. She sits in the villa's small study one afternoon, its windows open to a garden that smells like wet earth and basil, and turns the idea like a coin. She thinks of Fiona's steady hand, the intern who once offered her lunch without looking away, the vendor who wanted to be paid for his work more than anything else. She thinks of the way money had not sheltered her from cruelty, and yet how it now offers leverage to create structures that might spare others the same humiliation. She crafts a demand that is not brash but principled. She will accept financial security and support for a community fund, but she will retain autonomy. She insists on a seat at the table, an operational seat, not merely ceremonial, and requires that any foundation bearing her name include community-led governance. She refuses the expectation of a public marriage or a staged persona. In negotiation, she is precise and fair. She asks for a yearly audit and for safeguards that her name not be used to sanitize corporate scandals. The chairman listens, and in a moment of generational grace, accepts most of her terms. "We built this company with a desire to mean something," he says. "If you will take a hand in how that meaning is shaped, we will listen." Nina, facing the dwindling of her social capital, attempts an apology that arrives late and reads as damage control. She attends a small private meeting where she acknowledges that her inclination to wield scorn was cruel. Lillian accepts the apology with an awkward civility. She will not weaponize her social vindication for revenge. She believes quietly that dignity is not the same as conquest. The legal inquiries into the contract scandal reveal a messy chain: an overzealous vendor, a hurried override, an insecure promotions manager, and a clerk who panicked and attempted to tidy the record. Mr. Chambers faces disciplinary action and later resigns. The vendor is compensated and retracts any talk of charges.
The resolution favors remediation over punishment, which means consequences are real but not theatrical. The city, which at first thrives on spectacle, tired of the story as soon as it ceases to feed its appetite. Evan attempts one last gambit. He turns up at the villa with a lawyer and an offer that smells like reconciliation wrapped in a settlement sheet. He suggests a compromise: his silence in exchange for financial security and occasional attendance together for appearances. Lillian, who has learned the calculus of self-preservation, looks at him with a clarity that is almost gentle. "You left," she says. "You chose absence. I am not for sale." The lawyer, used to bargaining, flushes. Evan finds himself alone, offering excuses that land like scraps. The man cannot buy the dignity he once took. He leaves with his briefcase and the faint smell of regret. Harry, who has watched these negotiations from a distance, does not celebrate as if victory has been earned. Instead, he arrives one evening with a small, practical gift: a book of civic design and a map of local community centers, things that say more about future work than about instant gratification. He has stayed not to rescue, but to collaborate. "We can do something real," he says. "When you're ready, we'll figure out how to start." It is a version of partnership that delights Lillian because it asks less of spectacle and more of stamina. She accepts his company without making a promise about marriage. The reader of their story will notice the difference. One is an arrangement for life, the other is a pact to try. The villa, over the following months, settles into a new rhythm that feels like a life intentionally built. Lillian takes the foundation's papers and learns them as if they were a new recipe. She visits local housing projects, hears stories that sometimes hurt and sometimes heal, and learns to measure impact in the small ways: one repaired roof, one class for young people on financial literacy, a community garden that puts basil where there once was only vacancy. Fiona becomes the foundation's vice chair in spirit, if not in title. She attends community meetings, her fingers tracing patterns in a notepad as she produces the sort of common sense plans that bureaucracies often overlook. There are quieter moments too. Lillian spends an evening teaching a group of teenagers how to fold napkins into shapes that make plain dinners feel like ceremonies. She laughs when one of them asks why she cares. "Because," she says, "everyone deserves a little ceremony."
Social life for Lillian is not snobbery reclaimed, it's proximity to people who choose one another. She returns to the Sullivan board not as a passive entry in an old ledger, but as a force that can nudge decisions about housing policy, about local vendor support, about employees who need dignity more than public relations.
She hires people with small admissions of past mistakes, offers them apprenticeships and oversight, and insists on transparency. Nina, having lost the quick edge that social cruelty gives, finds new ways to be relevant. She volunteers for a committee on public relations ethics, an uneasy fit that slowly teaches her to measure words before she uses them. She learns in private that social grace looks best when not used to kneecap strangers. Mr. Chambers, after his resignation, moves west and opens a small events consultancy that humbly avoids games of influence. He writes Lillian a letter, months later, expressing an apology that is long and human. She accepts the letter and replies with a short note that is, in its economy, a forgiveness that recognizes consequence. "We all needed different lessons," she writes. "I hope we learned." The vendor, once terrified, becomes a partner for the Foundation's housing projects. His furniture now lines community centers that teach young people craftsmanship. When he delivers a customized bench to the villa's garden one morning, Lillian meets him at the gate, and they share a nod that needs no caption. The chairman ages visibly in these months, but there is a softness to him now that patience and acknowledgement have brought. He visits the villa and sits with Lillian on the garden steps, while Fiona tends the basil. He asks about the Foundation's first projects, and listens as Lillian describes apprenticeships and a small scholarship. He does not try to fix the past with grand gestures. He asks instead how to support the future. "Make the Foundation stubborn," Lillian says. "Make it stubborn about the things that matter, not the things that save face." He smiles, a slow, pleased smile. "Stubborn," he repeats. "Good." There are moments that show the true measure of transformation. A local journalist sends a photographer to the villa to capture a series on women's leadership. The photograph that runs in the paper is not glossy glamour. It is Lillian at a simple wooden table, hair tucked back, hands in dough as she helps a culinary student knead bread for a community dinner. The caption reads, "From privilege to purpose." The language could be more humble, but the picture is honest. The CD sees a woman who did not merely inherit an address, but who turned that address into something generative. Romance with Harry grows, not through proclamations, but through shared minutes. Mornings when he helps measure wood for a community bench, evenings where they debate the best kind of paint for a youth center. Their affection is practical and tender in equal parts. They move in together in an arrangement that is practical and warm, 2 apartments connected by a shared door, where each maintains space and autonomy. The city gossip industry tries to dress it as an engagement. Lillian smiles in the paper, and privately tells Fiona, "We have work to do. There's time."
Grandma Fiona, who had once been a guardian shaped by rumor and duty, now sits at the helm of kitchen duty for community dinners. Her recipes acquire a small fame. Patrons ask after the lemon oil she favors, and volunteers come in droves because they have heard that dinners at the villa are generous and unpretentious. Fiona collects visits and advice from women who have survived different sorts of weather. She is, Lillian thinks, the true foundation of whatever this life will be. The one antagonistic note that remains unfinished is Evan. He files for a partial public restitution, less to right a wrong than to secure a small emotional victory. The hearing is private and thin on drama. Evan asks for recognition, for an amount that would curve some public perception to his favor. Lillian attends because she believes in accountability. She sits across from him in a neutral room and speaks with the calmness of one who has learned to value words. "This is about more than money for you," she says. "I won't be a bargaining chip in your ledger." She sets boundaries, and they are respected. The settlement, small, without spectacle, closes the book on his claims. He leaves satin-smooth apologies in his wake that mean little. Lillian does not gloat. She does not need to. The space he leaves is, for the first time, truly hers. Time passes with the steady logic of seasons. The Foundation funds its first community roof repair and its first scholarship. Lillian stands at a ribbon cutting, a small moment that flutters between humility and satisfaction, and clips the ribbon with her own hand. The camera catches her there, a woman who was once the target of gossip, now handing tools to a young graduate. At the year mark of the villa, the Sullivan Group hosts a quiet anniversary for the Foundation, and the chairman invites Lillian to speak. She thinks of the list of people who helped her, the intern with steady eyes, Richard, who traced logs like a detective with patience, Gavin, who taught her how to read corporate anatomy, Mrs. Sullivan, who had the courage to reach across a wrong, and Fiona, who had loved her regardless of title. She speaks without drama, using language she has learned from life rather than the corporate class. We were taught, she says, that worth is something you earn by accumulation. I think now that worth is something you confirm by how you make room for others. Money can make things better, but it becomes truly useful only when someone chooses to use it to repair what was broken. Her words travel beyond the room. The paper the next day runs a piece titled, "An Heiress Who Chose Work Over Pageantry." Comment sections glow with approval and irritation in equal measure. Such is public life. But the small projects under Lillian's name continued to yield concrete results. Tenants who no longer fear surprise evictions. Apprentices whose wages allow them to dream. A garden that gave herbs to the community center.
There are quiet evenings where Lillian sits on the villa's back steps and counts the ordinary joys. The sound of a plane in the distance, the basil she clipped that morning, a letter from a child thanking her for a scholarship. She keeps the black card in a drawer now, not as a talisman, but as a document of a time that taught her the cost of being visible. She understands now the strange alchemy of luck and work. Chance opened a door. Character was what kept it open. Mrs. Sullivan visits less often now, but when she does, she brings small, uncurated objects. A jar of jam from her own kitchen, a note about a neglected tree in the old family orchard that might be restored into a community space. She listens when Lillian speaks, and in private, admits mistakes with a softness that is not theatrical. "We tried to fix a wound with a gesture," she says. "We should have started with a conversation." They repair, slowly and honestly. There is no tidy erasure of the past. There is, instead, a willingness to build new patterns, a scaffolding of practice and policy that the company begins to adopt. The foundation insists on transparency, audits, community representation. The Sullivan Group, chastened, begins to make incremental changes in its outreach and vendor relationships. The change is neither sweeping nor fast, but it is tangible. Lillian learns to be patient in her impatience. In the end, the transformation that seems most shocking to the world is mundane to Lillian. She moves from being defined by how others cast her to choosing the contours of her life. The wealth is real, the villa, the financial security, the black card now a harmless rectangle in a drawer, but what shocks the city, and sometimes herself, is the way she shapes that wealth into a life that refuses to perform for tabloids and instead performs in the slow architecture of repair. On a late summer evening, with the garden humming and Fiona making a stew that smells like home, Harry returns from a day at work and finds Lillian at the table with a stack of mail, a vendor invoice, a thank you letter from a scholarship recipient, a community request to renovate a playground. She looks up and laughs at something small and private that makes her face open. He sits down across from her and, in the easy manner of people who have built trust, slides a small envelope toward her. Inside is a ticket for a modest weekend away, a small trip neither ostentatious nor performative. He takes her hand and adds, "No headlines, just us and a place with bad coffee and good walks." She squeezes his hand and replies, "Yes, it is not a promise of forever, it is a promise to share the next moment." In the quiet that follows, Fiona catches Lillian's eye and nods, the old woman's look saying more than any speech. They have moved through storms and rumor to a life that feels honest. The transformation is not a fairy tale. There were hearings and resignations, apologies, and awkward reconciliations.
There were moments when the city hissed and then moved on. But underneath, something steadier formed. A woman who knows her value, who will not be bought or bargained into invisibility, and who chooses to turn a shocking fortune into patient work. The last image is simple and human. Lillian standing in the villa's garden at dusk, her silhouette soft against the blue sky, as she pins a list of priorities to the foundation board. A list that begins with small, plain items. Repair one roof, hire 2 apprentices, host a community dinner. She closes the board and locks the villa door, not because wealth needs guarding, but because her life now has its own cadence. If you were moved by Lillian's journey, from a life narrowed by divorce and humiliation to one where money becomes a tool, not a throne, subscribe for more stories of unexpected transformations. Share this with someone who needs to know that dignity can be reclaimed, and that luck, when met with courage, can be turned into something that lasts.